Hey guys, what's going on? Valk here, and today we have the August 4th balance adjustment preview, the balance patch dev notes for this batch of heroes. Now, I know the overwhelming sentiment is that this balance patch is rather flat, right? It's not a whole lot going on, but my personal feeling is that, last year for E7WC, right, halfway through the tournament, they dropped the balance patch, and it kind of flipped the meta on top of its head with picks like May Chloe, right, and the carrot buff, the researcher carrot buff, which really changed the bruiser meta. So I actually think this balance patch is pretty reasonable considering that SGs probably, hopefully, learned their lesson about messing with the meta before, their biggest tournament of the year. So personally, I'm okay with the balance patch not being, extremely balance heavy and buff heavy. But, I wish they just did more patches like this where it's, small things that tweaked a few heroes. But they do it more often. As is, we take what we can get. So, without further ado, let's just jump right into it. For this batch, we're looking at Faithless Flidica, HYufine, Ervalen, Senya, Great Chieftain Khawana, Rikoris, Captain Rikoris, Yoonryoung, and Arowell. So not a whole lot of exciting heroes. And in terms of artifacts, we have Alencinox Wrath and Double-Edged Decrescent. So, it looks like a lot on paper, but when you really get into it, it really isn't. We'll just go through them one by one. So first up, we have Faithless Flidica. Basically, what they did was, she was originally going to be on crit chance next, right? And now she's just rewarded by stripping 2 buffs. Before, having something like an FCC was one of the biggest counters to Faithless Flidica because that extra barrier would just protect people's immunities off rip. With an additional dispel on the S2, what that does for her is essentially now she can strip 2 buffs, so she can kind of counter FCCs now. Faithless Flidica in general, I would say, doesn't see a lot of play just because units like Peyra, Ran, even see Lilius, right, over time just kind of power crept her base speed, which is honestly her biggest issue. So I don't see a world where Faithless Flidica sees a lot of play unless it's a longer format, like the E7WC game mode where throughout 3 rounds, it's going to be like 6 pre-bans, right? In these formats, I actually expect to see Faithless Flidica see some play because if you consider the fact that first, when she starts out, right, she pushes 20% to her team, and then 100% to herself, and after that, now she can push 25% for her team and herself, right? It's actually quite a bit of cycling, and having this much CR manipulation on a S2 that cannot be counterattacked is actually really powerful. It's one of the reasons why she was so good in the first place, back during the simpler times like Season 2, Season 3. So in longer format games, I would expect her to see some play when all the openers are banned out, but other than that, I do think she's a little too difficult to run nowadays just due to the base speed differences between her and, the modern openers. HYufine. Okay, so this one is actually, it doesn't look like much off-rip because her evasion is adjusted to 35-35 for a grand total of 70, up from 20 and 50. So normally she'll just have a little bit more evasion, which makes her a slightly better bruiser. But I think in normal bruiser versus bruiser matchups, she'll still have this problem where forced AoE attacks means you're just really weak into Rem, and I don't think stat-wise she'll ever be able to fight a Ravi or something like that 1v1. But instead of giving herself greater attack buff for 2 turns, she now gives attack to all allies, which is actually pretty significant because let's not forget, she cleanses and she CR pushes. So, like my buddy Drag said, right? Shoutouts to Drag, Mr. HYuYo, okay? She's essentially a closer Charles that cleanses, which is actually very significant if you consider the fact that a lot of people will play control units, especially as, things like Peyra, Ran, sometimes still Fairy Tail Tenebria, right? Against aggro players who aren't very fast. And having a pseudo closer Charles that can, CR push, attack up, and on top of that still cleanse, actually makes HYufine kind of important for aggro players. Do keep in mind though, she'll still have a very hard time into units like Conqueror Lilius, who's able to strip turn 1 immunities without actually having to attack the character. AOL as well kind of does the same. And on top of that, her base speed isn't exactly super great for initiating aggro, but I do think this just kind of turns her into part of the Swiss Army knife for aggro players, where you kind of have an initiator for every situation, and you just kind of cherry pick the best second initiator and fade her into a more aggressive draft. Up next, we have Ervalen, and man, they really just murdered Ervalen. Really isn't much else to say besides that. His kid basically went from being able to deal with a lot of units that are just meant to be super tanky, and he kind of just got gutted. Now, everything he does is for PvE. Basically, he's better against elites and boss monsters, he gets extra turns against elites and boss monsters, and he gives himself like a speed buff. So what I see him used for is, now that Guilty Gear has rerun in the game a few years now, and Baikon's been here since like year 1, right? It's possible that they no longer plan on rerunning Baikon, once a year, and they just need an evergreen Epic 7 unit that can go into like a Banshee one-shot or a Water Expo, right? And considering how Ervalen has never seen any real play in PvP, this really might just be like the retirement home he needs. Really sad to say, but it is what it is. So Ervalen, now a pure PvE unit. And I think one of the stronger buffs in this batch is Senya, which says a lot because Senya is one of those heroes where she has a terrible matchup into very meta heroes like Rimuru and HYufine. But they did buff her, so the thing is, they removed her random buff for a barrier. And it has a speed buff for herself, both 2 turns. The cool part is I think the barrier scales to her attack, right? And this is a hero where she starts out with over 5k attack. She can give herself greater attack buffs, so she can actually provide a pretty hefty barrier for her team. She'll be so this will make her pretty good into anything without too many buff strips, as long as the barrier amount is okay and it's not too thin. She'll do okay in standard, she'll do okay in aggro especially. But the problem is, in cleave, her activating this without an attack gets punished by units like Politis, where cleave players pick a lot. The other change they gave her was that her S3 now has an 85 chance to provoke for 1 turn off of her S3, which punishes a lot of no cleanse and no immunity in standard. But cleanse and immunity are kind of everywhere in standard already, so I think it's an okay buff. But I wouldn't consider it like super exciting. But the cool part is now that she will have 3 turns for her counterattack buff, as well as if you run the greater attack up exclusive equipment, she'll also have 3 turns to that. So in standard, she got quite a bit of a boost, but I think because she has such a bad matchup into anti-buff, and she has such a bad matchup into units like Rimuru and HYufine, right, as stated previously, she's still kind of confined to that 4th, 5th pick slot, but she's definitely a lot more reliable, and considering that some players still use her, she'll definitely see a little bit of competitive play like later on into the draft. Great Chief Khawana, basically they just made it so that her attack ramps up faster. I don't think it does anything in PvP, but she is used in KDs a lot, so it makes it so that she stacks up faster. It's kind of one of those buffs they did to just say, hey, we buffed him. Rikoris and Captain Rikoris. This is one where they changed a lot of skill text. So previously, Captain Rikoris is this hero that has a whole bunch of random utility. None of it really synergized, right? He had like Dispel, he had Stun, and he had a lot of extra runes that made him tankier, and I don't think that was like a huge help to him. But what they did now is kind of focus a lot of the runes to making up damage stats, and on top of that, they made it so that he's more reliable as a damage dealer. I think, as far as PvP usage, he's not going to see a lot. but they did make him more reliable for stuff he is useful, right? For stuff like Hades 13. I think a lot of this patch has just kind of went into making hunts more reliable for newer players, which, you know, while it's not the most exciting thing, considering the fact that E7WC is coming, right? We don't want to shift up the PvP meta too much, and if we do get a lot of new players coming in, you know, people who have seen the World Championships and people who are interested in the game, it does make the game easier for them. So can't say that's that bad of a thing. Yoonryoung. So she went from doing nothing to kind of doing something, right? Basically, now she gives herself a attack up and immunity for, she gives her team attack up and immunity for 2 turns. And on top of that, she decreased debuff duration by 1 turn after that. What they kind of did was make her into a pseudo Mediator Caloric, which is, you know, Mediator Caloric is one of the best supports, but she lacks 2 things. Her pseudo cleanse, right, decreased debuff duration, comes after the skill effect, which means if there's unbuffable, the skill is absolutely useless. And on top of that, she doesn't have Mediator Caloric signature debuff shedding ability. But for newer players who kind of just want this level of utility, it's usable. I can't say too much for it, but it's something. So if you didn't have an attack and immunity buffer, well, there you go, I guess. Next up is Arowell. I don't think any particular part of this change is really significant, but they actually gave her Escort for, you know, like, she actually has a skill called Escort, and for the longest time when we had Escort, it didn't give Escort, but now it does, so that's kind of cool. And then the other thing they gave her was so that if your ally suffered in a single target attack, she gets combat readiness. She now grants a barrier and barrier strength scales with her max health. And I actually think it's a very consistent kit, but considering the fact that she's a 3-star, so low base stats, and the kit is a little bare bones, I don't think she'll see play anytime soon. But what this does do for her is that it postures her really well for a specialty change. So if she ever gets a specialty change, I can actually see Arowell becoming playable, similar to another mitigator that got a specialty change, like Shadow Knight Pillars, who has a really good niche against extra counter and dual attacks. Now, onto the artifact change. Alencinox Wrath. I don't think this one's too crazy or anything like that. After Shu and Alencia's buff, those units definitely saw a lot of play, especially Alencia, who's really good into heavy buff up units like Dien and Landy. And as far as artifacts, Alencia doesn't really have a best in slot. From what I've seen, it's just a mishmash of whatever works for her. I've seen some people use Draco Plate, I've seen some people use Merciless Glutton, I've even seen, you know, myself personally, I use Durandal just for a little bit of turn cycling, right? And the newly buffed Alencinox Wrath just kind of adds to that pool of viable artifacts. As of currently in the game, there's not too many heroes, especially in the warrior class, that activates extra attack on their own turn, as you know, the condition for the artifact dictates. So right now it's only usable on Lencia, but having an extra 15% critical hit chance is just something really nice to have. You know, you keep 1 copy of that on an artifact, right? If you need to complete a build, boom, you just slap it on, right? An example I like to draw is I really like a Manic of Control for Thieves, right? Assassin Sid, Green Sid, anytime you're kind of missing that extra 15% crit hit chance, boom, slap it on. It's not the best artifact, but it does give you something like 24 gear score, and if you can fulfill the conditions to get the extra effect, it's really nice. So overall, an okay buff. And I think the real prize, and I say that with the air quotes of this batch, is this. Double-Edged Decrescent. Who asked for this? I hate it here. This is basically Milim's artifact on like Turbo Crack. I don't even know what to say. Basically, this is going to be Remnant Violet's new best in slot artifact. If he evades, he hits back, which gives him additional stacks. I know Remnant Violet isn't like the best hero right now. He has a handful of counters in the meta. But in a draft where Remnant Violet is good, man, is he gonna look like a god unit after those, because holy. Yeah, every time he evades, is just going to be a chance he counterattacks now. So he's going to be almost as toxic as Green Violet. I'm not sure who asked for this, but hey, you know, it makes the boy a little stronger. And now anytime there's a Bruiser Thief that gives himself evasion buff, I think this is going to be their new best in slot artifact. It's looking a little bit toxic. And low-key, I'm a little bit afraid of running something like this on Closer Charles, because I think even in aggro, that might make him a little bit too good sometimes. But we'll see. I think this artifact will be insane on anybody that has an evasion buff. And as long as they don't die and they proc a few counterattacks, oh man, who knows like what kind of ridiculous stuff they can do. So yeah, that's this batch, guys. Not a lot of exciting buffs, but we do have a few really ridiculous changes, like double-edged Decrescent. I think Senya and HYufine has some potential, but I can't say much about the rest. Let me know what you guys think about this batch in the comments. That's it from me for this video. And yeah, if you guys think I missed anything or I have a take that you guys don't agree with, feel free to let me know. I think this batch is going to not change the meta too much, but there's going to be a few hidden interactions that's going to make the game a little bit more fun. I don't personally have a problem with them, you know, not shaking up the meta completely every time there's a balance patch. I think small balance patch like this, where they move the needle just a bit, is fine. I just wish they did more of it. So let me know what you guys think. That'll be it from me for today. I'll see you guys in the next one. See ya. Hey guys, thank you for watching the video. If you found it helpful or enjoyable, you can show support by dropping a like and a sub. It costs nothing. If you have any questions or suggestions, feel free to leave it in the comments. I read all of them. If you want to see more of my stats or strats, you'll be able to catch them in my Discord, link in description. That being said, I appreciate you guys for sticking it out till the end of the video. I hope you guys have a great one, and I'll see you guys in the next one. See ya.